Chapter 65. All the Love in Both Worlds. 1 month later.
Dad, I have a question.
Yes, BB?
If I decide to go and live in Equestria, how long would it be before I could come and see you again?
I don't know, BB. A while, probably.
How come?
It's complicated. And to be honest, I don't actually understand all the details myself. I think that having too many things going back and forth through the portal can cause some sort of imbalance over here on Earth. I mean, you know how panicky people can be when dealing with the unknown, and pretty much only the people at high school in town know about Equestria, so if word got out about it on the whole, well, who knows the kind of damage it could cause.
Oh. I think I understand.
Yeah. Princess Twilight keeps a pretty close eye on things according to Sunset. Plus, there's the issue of travel time between Twilight's castle and wherever the hive is. It took your parents quite a while to make the trip, and they don't have cars over there last I checked. They had to make that journey on hoof.
But I would get to see you again, right?
Yeah. I don't know when, but yes. If you went through, we could see each other again. Someday.
I think I've made up my mind then.
That conversation had been 2 weeks ago. As Eventide and BB had sat on the Everfree Park Trail to catch their breath and take in the breathtaking view of the mountainside. They had talked off and on about Equestria over the weeks leading up to that, with BB asking plenty of questions to make sure he fully understood exactly what it was he was deciding on. And he had made up his mind. And in his heart, Eventide secretly wished that his son had decided differently. It was a late evening, and through the windows of the car, one could see the sun setting on the horizon in the distance. The far-off ball of gas and fire cast hazy orange rays of light across the world, blanketing the sides of many of the town's buildings in its glow, and sending long stripes of darkness spreading where the light could not reach. A few clouds rolled by in the heavens, drifting lazily in the wind. It was beautiful, and as far as Eventide was concerned, completely unfitting for what was to come. As he turned the car down another corner, his eyes briefly flicked to one side and caught sight of BB in the passenger seat. The bug was in his dog form, his piercing blue eyes staring directly ahead through the windscreen. There weren't very many people about right now, thank goodness for that. Only the occasional pedestrian wandered by, and vehicles were even less frequent. Just about everyone had gone home early for the day, as the common work week was due to start back up again tomorrow. Everyone needed their sleep, leaving the streets mostly devoid of activity. Another corner came and went, and at last the ever-so-familiar structure of Kennerlot High School came into view in the distance. Eventide's heart beat a little faster, and his blood began to go cold. Every instinct in him was screaming to slam his foot into the brakes and refuse to go another inch, to turn around and take his son home and never let him go. BB looked sideways at him, his face sagging with regret and sympathy.
Dad, it's okay,
he whispered in a tender voice, no doubt seeing his father's dread. Eventide sighed and nodded his head. I know. The car slowed to a halt right next to the school. Cutting the power to the engines, Eventide looked and caught sight of all the people waiting for them. There was Sunset Shimmer, Fluttershy, the Crusaders, and of course, Calipius and Lancia. They must have just come through, he thought to himself, before his gaze was drawn away from them by the swirl of green flames in the passenger seat. BB back in his real body, looked out the window for several seconds, his eyes glued on his parents. He slowly turned back to Eventide, his jaw clenching as if he wanted to say something. Eventide silenced him before he could speak, though. He leaned over and put his hand on BB's shell, his thumb right at the base of his neck. BB tensed under the touch for a second, but then relaxed and leaned into it, a quiet purr coming from the bottom of his voice. After several moments of this, Eventide withdrew his hand and looked into BB's eyes. "Are you sure about this?" He hesitated for a second, then nodded.
"I'm sure. I'm ready."
A heavy silence fell over them, and Eventide took the moment to look at his adopted son. "All right," he eventually said in a quiet whisper, before unclasping his seatbelt. "If you're sure, then we shouldn't keep them waiting anymore." BB hummed quietly in agreement. After another moment of hesitation, his horn lit up and undid his own seatbelt before opening the door. Eventide followed suit, stepping out of the car and circling around to stand by his son. All eyes turned to look at them as they stepped forward, and Applebloom came running up to them.
"Baby!"
She grated loudly before sliding to a halt right in front of them. She crouched down so she was at his eye level and peered deep into his glowing blue eyes. She stared at him for a long while, not saying anything. As the seconds ticked by, Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo came up and joined her, each one crouching down by her sides. BB finally looked away under all the attention he was getting, his ears drooping.
Hey, girls,"
he greeted.
"BB."
Sweetie Belle said in a low, hushed voice. She reached out and gently lifted his chin so he was looking at them again before giving him a small smile.
"It's good to see you."
He managed to return the smile at that, his shell twitching on his back.
"Yeah, it's good to see you all too. Do you really have to go?"
Scootaloo asked, her voice solemn. BB turned to her, his ears drooping again.
"Yeah, I do. There are so many things I want to learn about myself, about what it means to be a changeling, and..."
He glanced up at Eventide again, his eyes shimmering with an apology.
"And I can't learn those things here."
Scootaloo considered this for a second before sagging and nodding her head in understanding.
"Okay, fair enough. You just make sure you come back and tell us all about it, you hear me?"
She demanded, while jabbing him in the chest with a finger. BB managed a small smile at that.
"I will. Don't worry,"
he assured, before his eyes returned to Applebloom. His smile faded when he saw the still solemn look on her face. And then, to only BB's surprise, she reached out and tugged him into a hug, holding him tight against her chest. He squirmed for a second to get comfortable and then returned the hug affectionately, giving a quiet chitter. After a moment, Applebloom leaned back to look into his eyes.
"Y'all take care of yourself,"
she requested in a whisper.
"I will."
With that said, Applebloom finally smiled and put her hand on his head to ruffle hair that wasn't there. After a moment, she took a step back and got out of his way, the other Crusaders following her and clearing the path. And so they pressed forward, emerging into the very center of the group. Clypeus came forward first, only just catching BB when he launched himself against her in a tackle hug. She fell back onto her haunches with an oof from the force of the impact, but all the same returned the hug as tightly as she could. Eventide watched the two of them cuddle, his lips twitching up into the ghost of a smile. It was an adorable scene, to be sure. If only the circumstances weren't so depressing. Lancia stepped towards the two, his eyes briefly flicking over to meet Eventide's gaze. He then sat down by his mate's side and poked BB to get his attention. "Hey, BB. Are you sure about this?" he asked in a hushed whisper, bringing his face close to his son's. "It's not too late to rethink this, you know. And we won't be able to come back for a long time once we go through." BB hesitated, his eyes drifting away while his ears fell flat against his head.
"I'm sure,"
he finally acknowledged with a stiff nod.
"I want to see where I came from. I want to see the hive. And I want a mom."
Lancia studied him, as if looking for any signs of deception. Eventually, he gave a satisfied nod and backed off. "Clippy, give him some space," he called quietly to his mate. "Let him say goodbye." "Goodbye." Eventide went rigid the moment that word hit his ears, and it truly dawned on him what was about to happen. This was goodbye. It wasn't goodbye forever, but... His eyes affixed themselves to BB, watching intently as he was released from Clypeus's embrace. He stood there for a second, his ears twitching, before he slowly turned around to look up at Eventide. "Stay strong, Eventide," Eventide told himself. He shook his body to clear his mind and looked over at Fluttershy. Part of her face was hidden by her long pink hair, and the one visible eye was shimmering with tears. Her lip was trembling, and her breaths were becoming uneven. Something stirred in Eventide's heart, a compulsion. Slowly, he lifted a hand out to Fluttershy, beckoning her to approach. "Hey," he called over gently, drawing her eyes to him. He gave her a small smile, trying to hide his own tremors as well as he could. "Come over here." Fluttershy was motionless for a moment, looking unsure. But when BB turned to look at her, she made up her mind. With slow movement, she crossed the gap and took Eventide's hand in hers. Her grip was firm, as if she was clinging to a lifeline. Eventide swallowed heavily and pulled her into a hug. She returned it gladly, burying her face into his shoulder to take a few deep, shuddering breaths without having to look at the rest of the world. It took her a bit, but she was eventually able to pull back from the embrace, having gotten at least a partial hold of herself. Satisfied that she would be all right, at least for now, Eventide returned his attention to BB. Keeping Fluttershy's hand in his, he got down onto one knee, guiding her down with him. BB looked back up at them, his own face starting to tremble. He looked down and scuffed the pavement with his hoof.
"Dad? Aunt Fluttershy, I...
He tried, but the words wouldn't come. He shuddered, a single tear falling from his hidden face to splatter against the ground.
I'm going to miss you guys."
"We're going to miss you too," Eventide replied, struggling to keep his voice steady.
"Every minute of every day,"
Fluttershy added with a sniffle, barely able to smile as a few tears of her own rolled down her cheeks. BB looked back up at them, and Eventide's heart twisted when he saw the dark streaks rolling down his son's face.
"Thank you. Thank you both so much for taking care of me."
"You couldn't do it," Eventide couldn't keep it in any longer. He tried so hard to hold it back. But in the end, he screwed his eyes shut and looked down with a sudden sob. He felt Fluttershy's hand squeezing his in an attempt to comfort him, a gesture he returned without even thinking about it. Grunting, he wiped the back of his hand over his eyes to clear away the unwanted moisture before looking at his son again. He forced himself to smile. Of course. Ever and always.
We love you,
Fluttershy added, brushing away her own tears.
more than anything else in the world.
BB's face contorted, his teeth becoming visible in a sad grimace. Without another word, he jumped forwards and wrapped his forelegs around Eventide's neck in a tight hug. The gesture was instantly returned, and Fluttershy joined them. Eventide squeezed BB close, savoring the contact, and then looked up at Clypeus and Lancia. They too had tears in their eyes, though they were managing to smile all the same. Maybe they were happy their son had gotten such a loving adoptive family. Maybe they were just happy to have their son back. In the end, it didn't really matter, though. Clypeus glanced over at Lancia, then stepped forward until she was right in front of them. She reached out and put her hoof on Eventide's hand, before looking into his eyes.
Thank you again for looking after him when we couldn't,
she whispered.
I can never hope to repay you for everything you've done for my family.
Eventide sniffled, choked down a sob, and looked intensely into her eyes. Just take good care of him, okay? Love him and care for him and make sure he's happy. Do that, and we'll call it even.
We will,
Clypeus replied, before leaning forward and joining the group hug. She positioned herself so her muzzle was between Eventide and Fluttershy's heads before she spoke again, in barely even a whisper.
I'll give him all the love in the world. All the love in both worlds.
Eventide wasn't sure how long they sat like that, bundled together in a massive group hug. But alas, as the old saying went, all good things must come to an end. Slowly, bit by bit, everyone backed out of the embrace, with Clypeus stepping back to be with her mate again. Fluttershy and Eventide pulled back as well, looking into BB's eyes one more time. The bug sniffled, a few more tears rolling down his cheeks. Despite that, though, he managed to smile up at them.
Dad, Fluttershy.
Eventide took one of BB's hooves in both of his hands, holding it tight. We'll see you when you come back, BB, he said.
No matter how long it takes, we'll be here ready to welcome you back,
Fluttershy agreed, looking to finally be calming down.
And I can't wait to hear all about what life in the hive is like.
BB smiled at her, a quiet chitter bubbling out of his throat. He leaned over to give her one more hug, before finally backing away and standing entirely on his hooves again. He stood there for several moments, taking deep breaths, and looked into Eventide's eyes. The rest of the world faded away for the both of them, seeming to vanish and fade away into nothingness. It was just them, a father and his son, a man and his basement bug, and the boundless familial love they shared for one another. Goodbye, BB. Your nest of birds will be waiting for you when you get back. BB stared back up at him, his expression hard to read, Finally, he smiled and nodded.
I'll come back soon. I promise.
You'd better. BB's gonna get lonely without you. BB managed a quiet, weak laugh at that. It petered out quickly, though, devolving into a soft sigh. He took a deep breath, steeling himself.
Goodbye, Dad.
And with that, BB turned around to look at Clypeus and Lancia. They nodded at one another before stepping forward and joining BB in front of the portal. They turned to Sunset, who had been waiting silently, with her head down respectfully. I think we're ready, Sunset, Lancia told her in a quiet whisper.
Okay. Twilight's ready on her end,
was her quiet, simple response. Clypeus looked down at BB with that confirmation, a gentle smile on her face.
Are you ready, BB?
Before the basement bug could answer, Sweetie Belle's voice suddenly cut through the air.
BB!
She cried out, drawing all eyes to her. She was breathing shakily, tears of her own rolling down her cheeks. The same was true of Applebloom and Scootaloo, though they seemed to be making an effort to contain themselves.
We'll miss you!
BB didn't say anything, but instead looked between everyone gathered together. Sweetie Belle, Applebloom, Scootaloo, Fluttershy, Eventide, all of them. His best friends and his family. His eyes lingered on Eventide's for a second, and the man nodded at him. BB nodded back, and then turned to face the portal.
Okay. I'm ready,
he told Clypeus, his voice barely audible. Nothing else was said. As one, BB, Clypeus, and Lancia stepped forward, the portal starting to shimmer as they passed through. Sweetie Belle, Scootaloo, and Applebloom all began to cry out their own farewells, and even Fluttershy joined them in waving and calling goodbye. Eventide, however, remained silent, his eyes strained on BB's body, watching each part of him pass through, until the tip of BB's tail disappeared through the portal. That was it. BB was gone. Eventide tried to hold himself together, but it was no use. The second the light faded away, his eyes screwed themselves shut of their own accord. He couldn't stop the long, anguished wail that tore past his lips no matter how hard he tried. Everyone around him fell utterly silent, and he could feel their eyes on him. He could also feel Fluttershy's hands on his back and shoulder, gently pulling him up until he was held in a tight, comforting hug against her chest. In the distance, the sun disappeared behind the horizon.